There we go.
Recording in progress.
Recording in progress. Hello and
Got
welcome.
it. Hello.
Hello, Boff. I'm joined today for the second time by Boff Whalley. I'm extremely pleased to say. If you haven't heard the first part of the interview, I'd really recommend it. It's elsewhere on the YouTube channel, and I'll put a link underneath this video. But absolutely fascinating. And in part one, we went through life, both yours and of the band, up to signing to EMI. So we were just talking beforehand that this is your perspective of the story, your kind of angle that you're looking from, and obviously everybody in the band will have slightly different angles on this. So it'd be good to just point out that this is your angle, and that you were just part of one bigger bit. You were a part of the pie, the chumba pie. So
absolutely.
The vegan chumba pie, no doubt.
Yeah.
And
all those people, you know, even the kind of less vocal people in the band always kind of contributed to this really interesting mix that we had. And that, you know, it was that kind of mixture of certain kinds of people that really held it together. Because Alice always had this idea that we were kind of, which is right in a lot of ways, that we were working as a band at the beginning in a kind of golden age where we could go on the dole and we could get part-time jobs, and just in terms of kind of society and culture, it was a lot easier to do things. And I kind of argue against that. I think that we happened upon a special group of people that learnt how to work together. I don't mean special because we were good at anything. I mean special because we were like, look, we really enjoy each other's company, and we reckon we could do something together in this way without falling out, without fighting, without. So, you know, and even up till right till the very end, it was just a bunch of friends who learned how to make music together all at the same time.
Seems to be a bit like you had a very lucky chemistry. Like, you know, some people meet their partner at school and just stay with them forever.
Yeah.
Just because they got lucky with the right person first time round or whatever.
Yeah. But I'd say that because this is an ongoing discussion I've had many times, which is about the role of luck in things. Because you know, people will say, "Oh, God, that was so lucky that, you know, you had a hit single in whatever 1997," and I always think, no, a lot of those things, they're not luck. You know, when you're so we had the big squat we had in Armley, and when we were kind of making friends in order to invite them into the squat to live there, we were very careful about who those people were. You know, it wasn't just a kind of, because I know a lot of my friends in Leeds who had squatted houses, and people were coming and going all the time. Just like, oh, there's a spare room, and somebody would just move in and nobody knew who they were. And we never did that. We were always like, do you want to move in? You know, you're our friend, and we think it'd be great to basically try and live in this cooperative way with you. So it was all quite calculated.
I suppose, from my perspective, when I hear what you're saying there, I'm thinking that luck is probably the wrong word, but you were certainly mature enough or clever enough or whatever to do what you just said, you know, to only invite people in a considered way, whereas everybody else had a bit of a revolving door. So I can see that would make a real big difference, because those things were always very fragile in a lot of cases, weren't they? The peace, the stability was fragile and often short-lived.
Yeah. And I think in the band, I think that, you know, we went through a period of not playing gigs for about a year, and we kind of almost stopped playing. This was kind of about 1988 or something. I can't remember. And we only decided to start playing gigs again because we got offered to do a political conference in Tokyo, in Japan, as ambassadors for British radical thought, which we thought, wow, just the excuse to go to Japan. We
very Spinal Tap.
Yeah, we were like, quick, we better start rehearsing again, because we'd kind of let it go. So we all had part-time jobs, and we were losing loads of money by being in a band because everything we did was benefits and stuff. So, but even during that time, we just enjoyed living together, and, you know, writing together and working together and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's luck as in the way it came about, but it's a very lucky situation to be living in, I think.
It is. I mean, because there's a famous thing which is called Surrey or Syria, which is you can be born in Surrey or you can be born in Syria, and therefore your entire life map is set out for you. And obviously, it's luck being born in Britain. For me, as a white male, that's a big stroke of luck for starters before we go anywhere. And to be born with a mum who wanted to, with parents that want to look after you and all that sort of thing. That's all luck. But then once you start making decisions for yourself, then I think you kind of realize that you're making your own luck. You are putting yourself in places where luck happens.
Yeah,
it's hard work to get in those places.
Yeah, there's a great story about two identical twins who get born to a real waster father who's drinks too much, just sort of lies about the house or whatever, isn't a good dad or whatever. One of the twins becomes exactly like his father, and one of the twins becomes a really successful teetotal bloke. So they're completely opposite. And when they get asked, why do you think that happened? They both say, well, look at my father. It couldn't have been any other way, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So you got the band. I'm going to ask you about the house, actually, which I forgot until you mentioned it, really, to see how that all finished. But before that, you signed to EMI. What was I was kind of not in those circles when all that happened. I wasn't aware it happened. So what kind of reaction did you get from your fan base?
Well, we got absolutely loads of, hatred and loads of stick for it, which we knew we would. It didn't matter that, the thing that we talked about how it was really important to us that EMI had got rid of Thorn Electronics, which was the whole, so the only EMI that was left, especially because we were signed to German EMI, was the cultural division, was basically records. And so we didn't see any reason to be boycotting them anymore. But of course, it was we did understand that what it represented was something horrific and awful. It was just a complete sellout. And even though we justified it in terms of the EMI are no worse than anybody else, and they're not selling arms anymore, because we obviously wouldn't have signed to them if they were, selling arms to South Africa, etc. But at the same time, some of us, and I was one of them, had this kind of belligerent thing of, it was now 1997. We'd been through the anarchist punk thing. Our roots were in the anarchist punk thing, but they were also in Malcolm McLaren and Johnny Rotten, and they always were. And they were also in Frank Zappa and the Mothers, and they were in people that, for want of a better phrase, who fuck shit up, who kind of welcomed a bit of chaos in order to make things happen. And I was always a big fan of Malcolm McLaren's ideas. I think he got a lot of things wrong, but I think what he did in terms of just trying things even in the face of public spite, I just really admired. And he always had this whole thing from when he was young, from when he started going to art college just to get a grant, because he knew art colleges was a place where you could get in with a few drawings and get a grant. He did that. He started learning about situationists and realizing that failure was a brilliant thing, and that embracing failure was really important, because that means that you'll try things that you think might not work. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but embracing failure and going for it are really important, because if you don't do that, then everything you do is just safe and tidy and neat, and you just follow the rules and you'll do so part of the EMI thing was that. And I admit that I was one of those people who's saying, come on, let's do it. People are going to be upset and it's going to cause trouble with people, but we've had enough of just everything just being nice and safe, and let's do another anti-fascist song, and let's do another song about, you know, homophobia. And it was like, let's see what we can do with this. And if it doesn't work, we just get out of it. And so one of the ways we got into it was by saying we could go into this with our eyes completely wide open, having been, you know, working as in the music industry, for want of a better word, for like 15, 20 years by then. We could go into this with our eyes wide open, hire a lawyer, which was basically our friend Doug, who'd managed Hawkwind and Motorhead, and Doug and Eve, in fact, they're a couple, and say to them, look, we're going to do this thing, but we need you to make sure that we have absolute control over everything. We're not going to get messed around. They're not going to start putting out weird versions of songs and telling us what to write and saying you're not allowed to do this lyric and all the things that people accuse major labels of, all the censorship, soft censorship things. And they said, yeah, great, let's do it. Because they knew that they were sitting on a song that this major company really wanted. So they had the power to go into those rooms, sometimes with us and sometimes without us, and say, well, we're going to sign this thing, but this is what has to happen. This. And it was all about control. And it was all there on paper, including, you know, us walking out of the deal whenever we wanted at any point, you know, things like that they never put in. But it was so urgent. This song was being played on the radio by then, and they were desperate to get it. And so they just said yes to everything. And they gave us, I can't remember, some big wad of money as a starter, but really it was just this idea that if we stayed with them for a couple of years, then that money would be such and such thing. And so we immediately got together as a band and said, well, this is an opportunity to do something really interesting. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's travel to places that there's no way we could have, you know, because we wanted to go to America, but we'd not been able to go since we toured there about 4 or 5 years earlier, because we just couldn't afford it for 10 or 12 of us to go there and tour. We just couldn't afford to do that. And suddenly we could afford it. So we said, let's do things like that where we can go and play to people who haven't been able to see us. And we did a thing where, because there was 8 of us in the band, and then there was, with Doug and Eve looking after all the kind of contract stuff, that was 10. And we split everything 10 ways equally. But then what we did is, 9 ways. Doug and Eve got 1/9. But then we'll give the other 10% to organizations and people who need money. And let's do that before we've even discussed whether there's going to be money there or how much we're going to get. Let's commit to doing that at least for 2 or 3 years. And that was great, because we just funded all sorts of people doing things like fanzines or pirate radio stations, or, you know, even just things like, you know, helping with daycare centers and nurseries and stuff. And it was all a kind of question of, we would say to all these people, well, you have to understand this money's coming from, you know, our ill-gotten capitalist adventures. And most of them, even the kind of most lefty anarchists, were kind of going, yeah, we'll accept that and we'll take the money. You know, when you're offering some, you know, fantastic activist group that really need the money, and you're saying, well, yeah, we'll give you like £25,000, but you have to understand that, you know, we're taking on the burden of being the sellout bastards. You just get the money, but as long as you understand that. And they said, yes, okay, yeah, we want the money. Nobody turned it down, which was great. And I just thought, well, this is really good, because we're using this money in a wise way, as well as all getting our 10%. We were giving 10% of it away. And of course, then it meant that, you know, we weren't stupid about it. Nobody went out and bought a new car and some gold jewelry and all that sort of business. So, and we had an adventure for a couple of years. We went everywhere around the world. And then it became clear that we weren't going to make another song or single or album that was going to sound just like Tubthumping for the sake of it. And so Republic in America and EMI in Germany both went, I'm not sure if this is kind of working out. You're not selling loads of records anymore. And we were like, well, that's fine. Yeah, we'll leave then. I think we did about 2 years. We'll leave then. And by then we had enough money to set up our own record company, and make singles that we wanted on CD and just give them away and things like that, you know, all sorts of things. And so yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it was total win-win. And the fact that Oi Polloi put out a single, a kind of compilation single with like Bus Stop Loonies and a few other people, which was an anti-Chumbawamba EP, just made it all the more thrilling and fantastic. I was so happy to get a copy of that single because I just thought that's good that they're doing this and that's brilliant, and I totally support them for doing it. You know, I thought it was great, and it's you know, it's a big part of my, you know, like if I had to run back in the house and there's a fire and I've got to save some of my old records, I'd grab that one.
I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear it. I'd like to talk a bit about the experience of having a hit record and going around the world and so on, because well, actually partly because I've never done it, of course, but also because I think you've probably got a quite a unique take on it compared to, I don't know, Bros or Madonna or something. So what was it like doing things like the big American TV shows and so on? Did you lose any sense of yourself, or did it change any sense of yourself, or was it just weird? Or
I think if anything, we kind of I think our sense of ourselves just became even more embedded in who we were, in kind of, you know, growing up in a working class town, determined to use whatever platform we had to talk about the world, you know, all that sort of thing. It made us even more wanting to be part of that. You know, when you do these big American shows and they say, oh, we'll send a limo round, you know, to the hotel to pick you up, and you say, no, actually, could you not send a limo, please? You know, if you can send a van round or a car, and that'll be fine. We don't want to turn up at some big TV studio in a limo, thanks. And they go, oh, all right, okay, thinking you bloody weirdos. But it was our role to go, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not playing that game where you treat us like royalty and we get to be shit to other people, and we believe the hype of what it means to be successful and all that. We just never went for that. We were too old and cynical for that. You know, we did a thing where we sold enough records in Canada to get some kind of platinum or gold records or something. And they have these, and this happened a few times in different parts of the world, where you go to somewhere and the local record company people would have some platinum or gold records for selling copies of the album or single. And they want to do a presentation, and in general we kind of avoided them, but in Canada they were like, oh, please come and do this thing, you know, it's, you know, to say we'll give you these discs. And we were like, okay, yeah. So we went along to this thing and we were kind of taking the piss out of it because it didn't mean anything to us at all. The only thing that we probably thought that was good about it was thinking, oh, I can give this to my grandma, she'd probably quite like it. You know, I haven't got any of those things. And probably collected, don't know, 15, 20, 30 of them and just gave them away. And because they're just somebody else's album spray painted gold with a little plaque inside it. They're utterly meaningless and empty. And so we would go to these things and take the piss. And I remember the label boss at Republic, they were quite young, but they were really keen. And they said we went for a drink with them afterwards, after this ceremony where we were just all taking the piss out of it. And they were like, we can't understand how you treat it like that. You know, it's quite funny, but it makes no sense to us. They said we did the same thing in Canada last week to one of our other acts, and I can't remember who it was now. It's someone like Smash Mouth, some act that was doing really well in America at the time, that was selling millions of records. They were really, you know, and they were quite young. And he said, well, you know, and they were like tough indie band and everything. He said they were genuinely in tears. They were crying at the idea that they were being presented with these awards. It meant so much to them. And you were there just taking the piss out of them. And, you know, and we thought, yeah, that's the difference. We're older, we're wiser. It means it actually meant nothing to us. And whenever all these American radio stations would go, hey, what's it like to be successful? I would always think either A, success is measured in how long you've been with the same group of people and you still enjoy each other's company. Or B, for me, success was when the first single got played on the John Peel show. Definitely. That was definitely like, this is, obviously it's not the best thing in my life, including, you know, meeting your life partner or having children. But in terms of what you do for a living, that was the biggest high.
That's the dream, isn't it? When you
It was the dream.
Yeah.
It was this thing that I grew up listening to. And suddenly we were on there and John Peel was saying how much he liked the record. And I just thought, this is it. Kill me now. This is all I've ever wanted.
Yeah.
And in a way that kind of set us apart from the anarcho-punk thing a little bit, because we did get that thing where we were, you know, we playing to a lot of students and John Peel liked us. We weren't just part of that anarcho-punk thing, and we were really happy about that.
You weren't as ghettoized as most of the bands who
not quite. No,
most bands were willfully ghettoized, self-ghettoized.
Yeah. And the first time, I remember the first time we did just going back a bit to the first time we did a kind of what I would say was an anarchist punk gig, because we'd done our own stuff around Leeds, loads of gigs around Leeds with little punk bands and setting up squat gigs and things like that for about 6 months to a year. And then we got offered this gig down in Bristol, and it was an anarcho squat in an old church and it was, I can't remember who was on. I know Disorder played and Chaos UK, might have been Napalm Death, or maybe we play with them a bit later, but it was all those bands, those proper cider punk bands. And it was the first time we'd kind of been out of our county and been properly in that space with all the banners. And, you know, obviously I'd kind of come through all going to see Crass and everything loads of times. And suddenly we were part of that and we had our own banners, which we hung up. And that felt fantastic. I just thought, this is great. I really want to get accepted by these people who I love. You know, I love the music and the ideas and everything, you know, talking about like the Crass Flux thing, Anxiety, you know, D&V, all those kind of early Crass label things. You know, all them, the bands that had the early Crass singles. And that was lovely being part of that. But then being part of it for 2, 3, 4 years, it was like, right, okay, we need to be part of something else as well, because this scene it's getting too full of drugs and people fighting. And yeah, like you said last time we talked, it was too much to do with uniforms and the style of music. There were bands like Dirt, for instance, and Gary from Dirt. I was kind of friends with him for a little while, and I loved him at the beginning. And Gary's such a brilliant bloke.
Yeah,
really, really lovely bloke. But then I'd seen them time after time, and I thought, they're not like us. Because if they were us, I'd be thinking we could put harmony to that bit there, and that song could do with like a quiet bit, whereas a bit of a middle eight where it goes to a different chord, you know, or a different key. And I'd be, you know, and we were all like that in Chumbas. We were all like wanting to, because we grew up listening to stuff like, you know, the Marine Girls and Orange Juice, and obviously, you know, the Beatles and all that sort of stuff. We loved melodies and harmonies, and so we always wanted to expand musically. Anyway, sorry. Back to EMI.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You've got to shut me up sometimes.
No, that's fine. It's your soapbox. Not soapbox. That's particularly the wrong word in this case. But okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
You're touring the world. You've had this hit single, and the band name certainly is famous. One thing, like away from all the politics and all that, really, you're talking about all the anarcho bands you came in touch with. I presume you must have come in touch with quite a few genuinely famous people on these kind of rounds.
Yeah. And a lot of them were really lovely, which maybe you'd expect that because we were doing well then, and people kind of thought, oh, here's that band that have got that hit single, so they were nice. I've no idea, but some of them were genuinely lovely. Dolly Parton, on some American TV show, Dolly Parton was either there or she was in the other studio, and she came to us to ask for our autographs because her daughter really liked the album and she wanted it signed. And we were like, this is fantastic. This is Dolly Parton. It was always he's always been brilliant. She's
a brilliant person, Dolly Parton. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. And even, recently, she's always stuck up for that kind of working class kind of the people aesthetics kind of thing. Brilliant. But apart from that, we had Lou did this funny thing where she decided really early on that she was going to get pictures of herself with all the famous people that we met. And because then she could do a calendar where each month it's her with someone famous. I've got one somewhere. I wish I knew where it was because I'd get it out and show you. And just for her friends, because it would be funny, a picture of her with someone famous on every month. And the funny thing about it is that when she showed her daughter Ivy, when Ivy was about 15 or 16, she said, Ivy said, "Oh, I found this calendar. It's all these people. Who are they?" And she didn't know any of the people. But it was in the calendar was people like, so it was like, who would it be? So it's like Shane MacGowan, Dolly Parton, Tom Jones, Spice Girls, Robbie Williams. There were some people we liked as well. Robbie Williams was really pleasant.
Was he?
Yeah, he was. He was lovely.
I'm glad to hear that. He's from your part of the world, of course, isn't he?
Yeah, and because there are certain people like that who, when you meet them, you talk about where you come from and about football and about things that affect real people, and you talk about politics, and you don't kind of go. So we worked with Alex Cox, the filmmaker, on a film, and Christopher Eccleston was the star. And so meeting Christopher Eccleston, who I'd grown up loving as an actor, and I didn't go, "Oh wow, I saw you in such and such film," and and this. We just talked about football, about Man United and Burnley, and it was lovely. Yeah, and that's what I like. I just think great. Joe Cocker, I had a conversation with Joe Cocker just about Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. That's all he wanted to talk about, and I just thought brilliant. But so anyway, so she's doing this calendar and she's going around with a camera, but she's like, this is in the days of proper cameras. She'd just grab whichever one of us was nearby and say, "Quick, take me a picture. I'm going to go and say hello to such and such person." And some of them are, especially when they think you're just a person rather than you're in a band that's doing all right, they're just really horrible to you. So Bob Geldof was an absolute wanker. He was like, no, I don't want. And Lou was like, "Well, I just want a really quick picture, and he was like, "Oh, okay then, but make it quick." And then he did this thing where he put his arm around her and went. And then as soon as the photo went, he went, "Right," and like walked off. Because I was taking that picture, I just thought, "You wanker, absolute git." Lou Reed totally refused. Shane MacGowan was lovely because he didn't know what planet he was on, so he would have said yes to anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did. We met all these people, and some of them were lovely. Lemmy from Motorhead was obviously lovely, and he was. We did a festival with him in kind of what used to be Hungary. I can't remember where it was. Beautiful festival anyway, and he was brilliant, and he talked to everyone, and of course, and Lou and Jude especially were totally starstruck by him. Jude grew up listening to Motorhead. So she kind of went and hung out with him for a while and said, "He's such a lovely man. He's so lovely," and all this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You'll never hear anybody say anything different about Lemmy, will you? Everybody says that. Yeah.
I've just read this great book by Ian Winwood. I don't know if you read it, called Bodies. It's about music, the music industry, and how the music industry has enabled awful drug abuse and deaths and suicides and mental health problems. It's absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best books about music I've ever read.
Right.
Because he used to be a writer for Kerrang, so he's like done tours with people like Metallica and all these bands. And it's about his experiences and how he basically ended up, absolutely, you know, in an absolute state, you know, and his mental health is totally shot. And he just talks about his experiences, but also about all the people along the way who've either died or had awful problems, and you know, and how the record industry and the record companies and the media have no interest in helping people. They just drop you if you show this, you know, slightest hint of weakness. They just go, you know, we don't want you anymore. That's a great book. I would totally recommend it.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I've
Yeah,
written it down as you were talking.
yeah, it's great.
So I think you, from what I could see, I think you pretty deliberately kept the spotlight shone on the band as a concept rather than the individuals within it. When you were having this big fame bit, but you must have also come across situations where you were famous as people, in the sense that people ask you for your autograph or whatever in
Yeah,
situations.
yeah.
So how did you deal with that? What happens when somebody comes up and says, "Can I have your autograph?" I mean, I know that. I mean, I'm sure my experiences are nothing compared to yours, but I know that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah.
And so, what did you do?
I think what we did, because really early on, I remember reading about how bands like um, Crass and Discharge didn't do autographs. That was a big thing, because it's like, why is my signature worth more than yours? But then there was another kind of strand of thought which we kind of hit on quite early on, which is, in general, people are using it as an excuse to come and talk to you. So if you give somebody an autograph, then don't just sign an autograph and go, right, see ya. If you give someone an autograph, what you do is you say, also, where are you from and what you're doing and what do you do? And let's have a talk about, let's talk as normal people about why we've got some kind of connection together, or why you think you care about what I do. And I still think that now. And the other thing about that kind of very, very, very low level of fame is that it's useful in starting conversations. People think it means something, and you can at least say, you can be really down to earth and kind of explain that it doesn't really mean anything, and that you're happy that you've got that level of somebody knowing about you, but that it's really important that you deflect that and use it to talk about what's going on in the world and what other people are doing. And so, for instance, I know that, you know, from writing theatre plays and stuff, and Alice knows, because Alice, you know, she's writing for TV and all sorts of things now. You can't do an article in a newspaper or a press release or anything without the journalist or anyone wanting to say, and this was the person that, you know, had a hit with Tubthumping in 1997. And you think, oh, that's fair enough. If that gets people to pay attention to what I'm doing now, which is here's a play about a cooperative. It's a musical about a cooperative in Liverpool who've opened a bakery and made it work. And it's a, you know, all singing, all dancing musical about these people from Liverpool who've done something fantastic. It's nothing like Tubthumping in any way, shape, or form. But don't let that put you off.
Liverpool's ground, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, home baked. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wrote a musical about that, and I just think the idea that having that Chumbawamba or Tubthumping thing attached to it just to get people to look at it is really useful. So why not use it? Yeah.
Yeah. Then that period, and there's a bit here where you're going to have to sort of lead me a little bit, really, because I've got two things written down. We've got your kind of reincarnation as a sort of folkier band, and we've also, at some point, you stop all living in the big squat in the big house in Armley. Yeah. So, what was the sort of timeline on that? What happened? What happened next? I guess.
Well, we stopped living in the squat, kind of one at a time, until round about the Tubthumping era. Nothing to do with Tubthumping. It was all to do with, because Alice would have lived there forever, you know, but it was falling down basically, and the cost of, we always used to fix it up, and we did all sorts of work to it. We transformed the entire house and everything, but we just couldn't stop it falling down. It was It was very, very old, and it was collapsing, and it would have cost so much to carry on living there that Alice eventually had to say no. So, but the reason people moved out was just because they were having relationships and children, and it became easier to be somewhere else. One of the things about, so for instance, when I met my partner Casey, she was in America, and I didn't want to kind of go, oh, I've got this fantastic living situation that I've been in for 10, 12 years. And it's all, it's all set up. It's all set up exactly how I want to be part of this group of people. And now I want to welcome you into that group of people, and you therefore have to kind of subsume your ideas into that. It became really obvious that what I really wanted, and this is the true of everyone really, you want to say, let's do something together with this new person that you're both involved in, that you both make decisions about, that you both feel kind of happy with. And that's why I moved out. And so that I could say, right, Casey, if you're making the leap of moving over to a different country so we can live together, then I don't want it to be in that situation which is so fixed. And it was just that thing. And that basically happened to everyone. Everyone kind of moved out one at a time until there was I think 4 or 5 people living there. But Alice and Dambert were the last people in there. And Alice looked into all kinds of ways of looking after the house and keeping it going. And it was just too expensive. So she moved out in the end. And what was the other thing that you said? You had another strand. Oh, about the going into folk music and stuff.
Yeah, so same name, but
yeah,
kind of different bands. Sort of a couple of, I don't know how many original members or how many members made the transition, but there are also new people, and there was an accordion, and it was really good. I've got to say, I thought, but I don't really know much about that period. What happened there?
Well, we did an album that was because we did this thing where we usually thought if we do 2 albums of the same kind of thing, then that was enough. Then we had to move on to something else. And we felt we'd done 2 albums in the kind of Tub Thumper mode with the one after it, which was What You See Is What You Get. And so we were looking around for something that we could do. And me, especially with Lou, we'd always been really into traditional folk music since the early 1980s, going to see Christy Moore and Dick Gaughan, Leon Russellson and people like that. Because once we discovered that protest music, really angry music, didn't have to be rock and roll music and rock music, that was really liberating. That really helped us in terms of thinking, okay, yeah, I know about singing harmonies, in the early 1980s, I was kind of getting into that. But going to see folk musicians was another thing entirely. You thought, right, this is what you can do with your voice. We went to see a band called Swan Arcade. It's just 3 a cappella voices. Went to see them in Holmfirth in, I would say, around about 1984. And they just blew us away. 3 voices on stage in this place with about 200 people, and singing songs of rebellion, and including some cover versions of songs that were also kind of rebellious and stuff. And it was so powerful, and just 3 voices. And we went back to the band. I remember me and Lou going to see them, and then we went back to the band and said, we can do that. We can sing a cappella songs. Let's try it. And we started having a go at it. And one of the things about singing a cappella is that it's an absolute buzz to do it. If you can get 3 voices, but if you can get like 4 or 5 voices singing together in harmony without any instruments, it just creates something beautiful in yourself. I'm not saying it's beautiful for anyone listening to it, but it's so lovely to do. It's really rewarding, as a thing to do. And so all the time, right through Chumbawamba, we would always stick a cappella songs in the set because we just loved doing them, and we knew that it was a shock in terms of our audience. It was always so like during the Tub Thumper era, we did a gig in Madison Square Garden that was some kind of Christmas gig, and the headliners were Aerosmith, and we came on it was one of these kind of all day things. So for some reason we went on after Aerosmith, but on a different stage. And they came on, and I can't remember who else was playing there. Gerard, I think. Anyway, all these kind of famous bands, ridiculous. And we had a set list, but then halfway through Aerosmith's set, which we were watching, it was so incredibly full of power and bombast and kind of glorious, showmanship and volume. And we just thought, we can't follow that with our kind of weedy, with a Gibson SG and a one Marshall amp. They were there with stacks and stacks of Marshalls. You think, well, we can't follow that. What are we going to do? We can't just. And we said, let's just start by singing The Day the Nazi Died, which is just a 3-part a cappella song. Because this audience they're just not going to know what's going on. And we did. We came on, it was like, yeah, that was Aerosmith. Loads of explosions and everything. And next over here, we've got, from Britain, they gave you Tubthumping, and now here they are in Madison Square Garden. And we go, we taught that after the war, the Nazis vanished without a trace. 3-part, maybe 4-part harmony by that time. And the audience just shut up. And I just thought, this is the way to deal with this kind of thing. It was such a powerful thing to be able to do.
Yeah, to opt out of the whole kind of vibe or whatever.
Yeah, because we couldn't compete with that. So it's like, let's at least appear to be freaks and weird. Yeah. And so then after the Tubthumping era, and we did a couple of albums like that, and people were a bit burnt out from just traveling. And Harry and Dunstan were kind of like, we want to go off and try doing different things, doing kind of different music projects and that. So we said, let's do an album where we sample British folk songs, British folk singers, traditional singers. And that'd be an interesting thing to do. And we did that. And in doing that, we worked with various folk artists, like, just in terms of getting in touch with them, saying, can we use this bit of a sample of your thing? So this is people like Kate Rusby and Coot Boys and Simpson. And they were just all such lovely people. They were all like, yeah, of course you can use it. And we were going, well, it's for this record. So what do you want to do in terms of splitting the publishing royalties? Because we'd been in a situation where we'd once tried to put an album out with samples on it called Jesus H. Christ. And it got completely refused by all the famous people. They all said, we want 100% royalties on it. So we ended up bootlegging it ourselves and putting it out. But in this case, all the folk artists were just lovely and said, yeah, use it. And we'd go, okay, well, what do you want to do in terms of a split, in terms of the songwriting? We're using this much of your music. And they were all like, oh, whatever you want, just use it. So we were having to say to them, well, okay, well, we'll give you 30% of the royalties from this track because it's based on your sample, even though we've done all the other stuff. And they were like, oh, fantastic. So we sampled Davy Graham, who to us was a real acoustic guitar hero. And he'd written Angie, and he was just an actual, a real legend in that scene.
Stones song, Angie.
Say that again.
Do you mean the Rolling Stones?
No, it's I can't do it with my mouth, the acoustic guitar. It's this beautiful piece of acoustic guitar work that Paul Simon, it's one on the Simon and Garfunkel albums. But it's a tune that all the folk guitarists want to play. So he was a real kind of hero, and we knew he'd done fantastic things in the folk world. And we sampled his work and his tune for one of the songs. He got in touch, or his manager got in touch and said, "Oh, that would be absolutely brilliant," And after the album came out, we got this note saying, "Oh, I know you're playing in London, and I'm looking after Davy Graham, and he's not very well at the moment, but he wants to come to your gig because he wants to talk to you because you've used his sample on this thing." And so we were like, "Oh, brilliant! Yeah, fantastic! Of course he can come." And we were backstage after the gig, and Davy Graham came in, and he was not in a good way. He was really ill. But he just said, I just want you to know that the royalties I got from your song, from having that song on the single and on the album, I'm just really grateful, because it meant that I could buy a new Hoover. And we just thought, this is fantastic, being able to do something where you get to buy your folk heroes a new Hoover for their houses. Just felt like this is real. This is actually, it's not just, it just brought it down to earth. And I just thought, this is lovely. And all those folk people were so lovely. And we just said, why don't we just try doing that a cappella thing and going into folk clubs and singing a cappella and strip away all the rock and roll out of it for a while and see what we, because we'd done an a cappella album in the 1980s and we'd never toured it. We'd never done it live because it didn't involve everyone. Whereas now everybody wanted to go off and do other things. So we said, well, why don't we, the people who want to, just do the a cappella thing? So we fell into being a folk band for a few years and really enjoyed it on a completely different level, and touring in places that we didn't used to play before, and just writing songs differently. It was a real challenge to write songs that we knew, you know, with accordions and acoustic guitars rather than drums and bass and everything.
Did you have to learn a cappella? I mean, that sort of thing always seemed to me the province of proper singers who can read music and all that kind of lark, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
did
No,
you
no.
have to learn how to do it?
Yeah, we had to learn, because I had a version of it, which was basically doing two-part harmonies, which were either Lennon McCartney or Simon and Garfunkel, because I'd grown up listening to them, because my dad had some of their albums. My dad, when my mum met my dad, my new dad, he had a copy of Rubber Soul by the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits, and they were in stereo. And what stereo meant back then was that you could, on the stereogram, you could switch it to one side of stereo or the other. And on Rubber Soul, for instance, especially, you switch off all the music by switching it to one side, the stereo version of Rubber Soul. And on the other side is just the vocals. So I used to listen to John, Paul and George, but mainly John and Paul, harmonizing and just working it out. And so some of the, you know, and I learned how to do all those harmonies and worked out why they worked, kind of instinctively, but also because I just knew them so well. I just got to know them so well. So then when we started doing Chumbawamba, I was, and Neil, when Neil joined the band, he's a fantastic musician, and he would go through harmonies saying, that note doesn't work with that chord unless we want it to, you know, if you drop it to the seventh, then that chord becomes much nicer. And so we go, all right, how do you mean? And he'd go, you know, and he'd sing this part, and you'd try it, and oh yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. And you go, let's end on a major seventh rather than on a minor seventh. You know, we're like, okay, again, how do you? So it was part instinct, part learning, and the learning is lovely. It's, you know, because I run a choir now, and everybody's involved in this choir. There's like 50, 60 people there. And they all chip in, and they'll all tell me when I've got something wrong. They'll go, "No, we don't like that bit where it does that. What about if it does this?" And well, okay, let's try it. And they try it, and I think, yep, you're right. Your version's better than mine, so let's do that. Just trying different ways of singing with each other, and it's just a lovely thing to do.
Wasn't going to be next on my list, but this does flow quite naturally into the commoners choir, doesn't it?
Sorry, can I just ask, have you ever
Okay.
tried, you know, singing kind of harmonies with people, with like, say, 3 people?
No.
Because you'd be able to do it.
And therein is possibly the stumbling block, really. I've never thought I would be. I've always thought this is
You can
what
do
kind of
it.
technical people do, you know?
Yeah, no. If you're in a room with 10 people and everybody sings happy birthday, and you sing along with them, and everybody sings the same tune, if there's one person, maybe there's one person out of every 100 that can't sing happy birthday with everybody else, and they're somewhere else, and for them it's more of a struggle. But I can say, just from listening to what you did literally 30 years ago, whenever it was, that I would have listened to what you were doing, I think, yeah, he can sing. Do you remember? I remember listening to what was it called? Amiga Tribe.
Yes.
Angry Words, their first single.
That had some like bits on it, didn't it?
It had
Yeah.
little melodies on it. It had harmonies on it.
Yeah.
That was like, okay, whoa, there's another band in the Anarcho-punk thing that does harmonies. This is brilliant,
Yeah.
you know. And that was lovely to discover, and thinking it's quite simple. When people do it, it sounds great, you know. So yeah, you could do that.
I picture harmonizing being, you hear somebody going,
Yeah.
and I picture harmonizing having to sing that, but on a different scale, key, whatever,
Mm.
different key, isn't it? That to me automatically says you've got to know what you're doing.
No, no, you don't. I'll say one interesting thing that you can do with anyone. I've done this with when I meet people, someone in the choir called Dave. He runs a punk label. He used to run a punk label in the 1980s and put gigs on. He put Fugazi on and all sorts of bands. And I saw him in a bar, and we'd both had a couple of drinks, and he was like, "Oh, I've heard about this choir that you're doing." Yeah. He said, "I could never be in a choir because I can't sing." And I said, "Really? Can you really not sing?" And he's like, "No, I can't." And I said, "Go on then, sing me something, just anything, and I'll tell you whether you can sing or not." And he goes, "Oh, I can't do that." I was like, "Come on, have a go." So he sang about, 2 or 3 lines of some song. I was like, "Well, of course you can sing." Um, and as soon as, and so I do this thing, which is, the Beatles. If one person sings, "Last night I said these words to my girl," all on one note, and someone else goes, "Last night I said these words to my girl," then all you have to do with the other person, you say, just sing it all on one note. And if they can do that, then you've got a 2-part harmony straight away. And people are really impressed. They think, "Oh, I can sing in harmony." And I think, and when you do, and so Dave, who ran the record label, he's now like an essential part of the choir. He sings tenor parts really beautifully, and he's now really confident as a singer. And I can say to him, "Dave, this part's a little bit dodgy. Can you kind of sing up and show everyone, how to do it?" And I know I could have certain people in the choir I can say to that, and he'll do it. He'll say, "Yeah, okay," because he's confident now and he can sing it.
So choirs, this is a weird one, isn't it? I mean, choirs throughout our youth meant churches and
Absolutely. Awfulness.
and what's that program on Sundays?
Oh yeah.
That thing
Hymns
where they
of
sing all the hymns and so on.
some songs of praise.
Songs of praise, that's it. Yeah.
Oh God, turgid, awful rubbish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's choirs, or at least always was.
Yeah.
And then there, because we have quite a few of them down in Brighton. There's people who do, I don't know, Smith songs or whatever in choirs and so
Yeah.
on. What came first? Did you were you inspired by all that, or was that all that inspired by you? Or where does the communist choir fit in with all that?
I did some so I got into theatre, and then I got into this kind of doing kind of arts events with a couple of people, different people that I knew, and someone called Dan By and Sarah Punch, and they said, there's a commission at Manchester Museum, which is a brilliant museum where they're quite forward thinking, typical museum full of things, things from other countries, and old stuff. But every 6 months or so they give space, often the whole of the museum, to artists to do something with. You can rearrange the way it all looks, or you can hang things, or you can respond to things. And they got in touch and said, "We're having this commission, people come in." Dan said, "We've got this idea that we can do something with songs, responding to the things in the museum and talk and singing." So I just jumped in and said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that with you." We'd never done anything like that before. And we got in touch with local choirs who I'd never done anything with, really. And I watched some of these local choirs, of local Manchester choirs, how they went in and watched them working. And they're amazing choir leaders. They're fantastic. They're like real craftspeople. And I watched these people, mainly women, all these fantastic women who run in choirs, and what they did with people with voices, community choirs, not people who sing professionally or anything. And then we brought people in into the museum and sang songs about the stuff in the museum and made it relevant to what was going on in the world in terms of politics and culture, in terms of climate change and things like that. About, let's not just look at these objects in a museum, let's think about how they affect what we do in the rest of the world. And so on this Saturday and Sunday, people that came to the choir, actually Penny Rimbaud came and saw that, which was really lovely, because he was with Christian and he came along and watched it. And it was just people going around the museum and suddenly being confronted by people singing from a balcony about the stuff that they were looking at, but relating it to what you do when you go outside the museum. How do you take this outside? And anyway, that was my first kind of proper time of working with choirs. And so after that, I thought, I hadn't done Chumbawamba for a while. I've always wanted to kind of do something else rather than just theatre and community arts things. Wouldn't it be great to have a choir that there was a cross between Crass and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir? Because we had Mormon Tabernacle Choir albums at my house when I grew up, all of which I hated, absolutely awful. But the artistry and craft of it, you can't criticize it. It's so beautiful, so gorgeously done.
I guess the other kind of choirs are football crowds, aren't they?
Yeah, and I've always loved that. Always loved that. I've done like written articles and stuff about that in the past. About Martin Carthy says that football crowds and football chants, they are the last real folk songs left in Britain. The last living folk songs left in Britain.
Yeah,
he really believes that.
Yeah,
I love all that. The fact that people can just make up songs like in the pub the night before and then start singing them on a football match with 2 or 3 of their mates, and within a week there's 15,000 people singing that song.
Yeah,
that someone's just made up. It's just gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah, I've got a record, one of the 3 or 4 records I still own, in fact, called the Cop Choir, which is the Liverpool crowd from the mid-70s. And
brilliant.
Pink Floyd actually sampled it on one of their songs. And it's really beautiful. I think back then people did sing more. These days it's all very quick and kind of more shouty. But back then, and the Welsh rugby crowds as well.
There's a really good YouTube clip of the Cop in the 1960s, in about 64 or 65, singing, I think it's She Loves You.
Yes, yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah, there's a guy in front of them and they're all swaying.
With the scarves, and they know what they sing all the verses and everything. It's like, whoa, brilliant.
Yeah, well, that's where it started, isn't it? The Cop singing along to the Beatles.
Yeah. Isn't that lovely? There's a great book by someone called John McGrath, who's a writer on theatre, and he ran when I started getting into theatre, kind of radical theatre. And of course I found out that the whole Crass thing had been a theatre group, a kind of, environmental happening theatre group. Was Exit before they were Crass. And I'd grown up watching some of this stuff and been really inspired by it, what you can do with stuff like that, which is why Chumbas we always dressed up. We always did things. We always, we were really happy that people went away from early gigs going, oh, who's that weird band? I don't know, but they're that band, but they came on, one of them had a telly on his head. Someone said to us, and I thought, oh, that's great. Because people remember visual things. We grow up in a visual age, don't we?
Absolutely,
so, yeah. And I love that, and I think that I watched how just how theatre could be other things, and it kind of led on to getting more in. It was my kind of stepping stone into taking that into punk. And
this is something that really fascinates me, because this is an awful long way from the terraces at Burnley, isn't it, going into theatre? And this is, I suppose, why it personally interests me as well, is because this is probably still in an area marked outside my comfort zone. And if I sort of was sitting in the pub and telling my friends I was going to go into the theatre, I can imagine some of the looks I'd get, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So what's it like? What's the theatre world like? I mean, we've all got visions of Lovies and Darling and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a part of me actually thinks that might be quite nice, but a part of me thinks they'd be incredibly pretentious and difficult to talk to.
Yeah.
So yeah, spill the beans.
See, I've never known those people. Obviously, the kind of theatre that I'm involved in is not that world at all. And I think that
How's it different?
I'll tell you a quick thing about this conversation I had with this bloke in Leeds who now writes for, I can't remember, some telly thing, and we were just chatting about stuff, and he's very kind of, South Leeds working class Liverpool fan, Leeds United fan. God, he'd kill me if I said Liverpool. And we were just discussing. I was saying, so how did you first get into theatre? And he told the story to me, which is exactly the story that I could tell back to him, which is I was at school. I would have no interest in theatre whatsoever. It's the furthest thing I had in mind. But then someone said, oh, they bring in this play to school, and it's about football. It's called Zigga Zagga. It's about football hooligans. And you can go and watch it for free. And so I went and watched this play, which was Zigga Zagga. And it was all based on football chants. And it's kind of a bit of a cliche in that kind of 1970s sense, two opposing rival gangs, but done as a kind of musical on stage. But the fact that it was people like me, doing it with accents and with football scarves, it wasn't like posh people pretending. It just made me think that is brilliant. And at the same time, just about the time of punk, there was an experimental theatre group in Burnley who took over some wasteland. They were called Welfare State International. I didn't know this at the time. And they did a big procession through Burnley where apparently about 10,000 people went to it. And I was one of them, simply because someone said, weirdos are having a procession and they're having a big bonfire. We were like, great, come on, let's go. So we walked into town, went on this procession to the big, what we call the Wreck, the big kind of open ground near Turf Moor. And they had a massive bonfire. And they carried on this procession, they carried huge effigies of politicians and stuff. But the biggest thing was a huge papier-mâché, but lit from inside, Houses of Parliament on sticks, which they were carrying, which went through town. Fantastic, magnificent. And then they got to this bonfire and they put the House of Parliament on the bonfire. And of course, everybody cheered and loved it. And it was I just thought, that is fantastic. That's what we think of politicians, and then didn't think anything of it for years and years. And then eventually kind of read about this group in a book about Welfare State International. I was like, that's the group that I saw that made me think that's what theatre can be. It can be a big thing with real people. It's not posh people. It's not lovies and darlings. And in this book, sorry, this story's going on ages. In this book, it said that they were really disappointed at their time in Burnley because they felt like they hadn't made any headway with the local people because it was a very working class town. Nobody was really interested in what they were doing. And so they left. I think they were only there about 18 months. So about 3 years ago, me and Casey went up to visit the founding members of Welfare State International who'd been living in Burnley at that time, because I desperately wanted to sit down with them and say, when you're kind of redressing what you've done in your life, because they were old people by now, and you think you haven't had any effect, you've got to remember that there are kids who are 14, 15, same with people like Crass or anything, and you don't know what effect you have on their lives, and you flick a switch that makes them think, I want to go to art school, I want to do that, I want to build the Houses of Parliament and put it on a big bonfire, you know, with 10,000 people cheering. And so we went to visit them and sat down and told them this story about what an effect those sort of things have on you. And again, same when I first saw Crass it was in Maidstone when I went to college, at this tiny village hall. And I just thought, that is stunning. Eventually, I'm going to have to tell them what effect they've had on this kid who, up till then, was just full of the Fall and Joy Division and John Cooper Clarke and Patrick Fitzgerald and the Sex Pistols. And then suddenly there was this other thing, which is politics, proper politics. And eventually, yeah, I did get a chance to be able to say, okay, this is what you did to me, and it's really important that we don't forget those things. So anyway, that sort of theatre came into my life, so it was always there in the background. And eventually I got the chance to write something about the place where we lived in Leeds called Armley. Why doesn't someone write a musical about Armley? And this woman who was putting on a festival said, well, go on then, you write it. And I thought, well, I've never written theatre before, but I had a go, and we did this musical about Armley. It was about the fact that, well, it's about the history of Armley, but, you know, it was just really good fun to do it. And one of the people in it was a director of a theatre company called Red Ladder, really kind of down-to-earth, working-class bloke who ended up running a theatre company, a big Liverpool fan, proper Scouser. And we got drunk together after the play. And he said, you know, I really fucking enjoyed that. Why don't you write another one, but a proper one for Red Ladder? And that was it. I ended up doing theatre. And it was always with people that were down to earth and lovely and fantastic people.
That's one side of the camera. You say Welfare State International didn't feel like they were making any headway with, presumably, with the people, with normal people.
Yeah.
Sorry, normal people. It's a dreadful phrase, but
but yeah, it's fair enough.
So my immediate thought then is, how are you getting on with the people? What, by which I really mean, what are the crowds like when you do these theatre things? Is it just Guardian readers or no?
No, I think that, so for instance, when we did the home baked one in Liverpool, which was the last kind of big one that I wrote with Red Ladder Theatre, and it was at the Liverpool Royal Court Theatre, which is a classic city centre, good night out theatre. So, and because I was saying earlier about John McGrath, he wrote this book about, he went to Liverpool, and this is in the 1960s, and he became a director of the Everyman Theatre, I think it was, in Liverpool, which is a famous theatre. And he went in there and he said, I got to Liverpool, it was the middle of the 1960s, and I went in this theatre and they were putting on Shakespeare and, you know, Pinter and what, you know, I don't know, just plays that people put on in these places. And he said the audiences weren't very much, and it was all very nice, and, you know, neither here nor there. And then he said, I went out on the streets of Liverpool. I'd hardly ever visited there. And he went out and he saw poetry and art and music in all the pubs and comedians. And he said there was this vibrant culture everywhere. You know, people, you know, it's like Roger McGough and Adrian Henry, the Liverpool poets. And then there was like the Beatles and all the millions of Liverpool bands. And there were all these artists and theatre, you know, he says, why is this not in the theatre? And he wrote a book about it called A Good Night Out, basically saying, if you're going to write theatre, make it a good night out so that working class people will go. And that's always been my thing. So when we did the thing at Liverpool Royal Court, it's proper Liverpool people. They don't really know what they're going to expect, except that it has to be entertaining. So you don't write something that's right on politically and really dour and just really on the mark, and says, you write something that's funny and engaging and that they understand as part of their world. And then they'll get the politics, which is about a bakery in Liverpool who resisted being knocked down and has now created this whole terrace of people-led, you know, just fantastic projects to do with, you know, opening up their own shops, creches, you know, daycare centres, cheap flats for people to rent. This incredible thing that they've built from nothing, from just resisting being pulled down. Proper community. So writing a play about it was just such a gift. It was really good fun. You just met all these lovely people who were just happy to have some, and it got these big crowds, and they were getting, you know, 500 people for every show, and it was on like 2.5 weeks. And of course, at half time, well, it's not half time. I always say half time. At the interval, you could buy, you know, pies that were made by the bakery, obviously. And then there was a big kind of thing at the end. If you liked this play and you enjoyed it, then support Home Baked. And then I went up to Home Baked about 2 weeks afterwards, and they were saying, loads of people are coming in saying, oh, I've come up because I'd heard about it, but I'd never kind of been to the shop. So I want to come just to show me support, or I'll buy some pies while I'm here, kind of thing. And that just made me feel really happy that Red Ladder had sorted out this thing where it kind of puts people, it stops theatre just being theatre. It makes it part of a community endeavour kind of thing. And that's what I love about doing theatre. And that's what I always loved about doing music, doing rock and roll and all that sort of stuff.
Is it your day job?
You are?
Is it your day job? I mean, you know, is this a full-time thing for you now? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working with Welsh National Opera at the moment, which I've been doing for about 3 years, which sounds ridiculous. It sounds as ridiculous to you as it does to me. But what we're doing is, me and Sarah, who's the writer, I do the music. We work with a refugee centre in Cardiff. There's about over 200 people go there every day for meals, for haircuts, for English lessons, for recreation, for advice, asylum seekers and refugees. And we go there, and we've been doing it for a few years, and we kind of identify musicians from all over the world who have arrived in this country with their instruments, many of which I've never heard of, and I've never seen them. And they play these instruments, which is like, whoa, what is that? Oh, it's got 2 strings, and they're playing this fantastic stuff on it, you know. And we identify these people and then invite them to play as part of, with Welsh National Opera, with say 6 or 8 operatic singers, and with 6 or 7 orchestral players. And we create an opera together with the refugees, and Sarah gets people from the refugee centre, asylum seekers, to tell their stories and to turn them into words that can be sung. And it's great for the opera, because this is a world that I would never have anything to do with. And that is a world of, you know, rarefied kind of cultural status that I've never had anything to do with. But bringing those people, we bring them into the refugee centre, do the performance there sometimes, and they have a meal there that the refugees have cooked. And these musicians and the producers and the people from Welsh National Opera see this stuff going on in their city that they just didn't know about. And they get to play with people who play instruments that they've never seen or heard, in tunings that they've never played with. So it's a real challenge. And of course, on the other hand, the refugees get the chance to go into Welsh National Opera and play professionally. They get paid in this situation, and then we have an audience, and then people come and watch the thing that they've come up with. And again, it's all about moving into a world that I never thought I'd be in, but taking with me all the stuff I've learned along the way about trying to do interesting stuff that's interesting for me, but is also has got a value to it. It has to have value. The first thing I would think if someone said, "Oh, we'd like to commission you to write music for this such and such thing," the first thing I think is, well, where's the politics in that? If someone said, "Oh, we really enjoyed working with you at Welsh National Opera, we'd like you to just work on doing some new music for Figaro," Well, I would think, what's the point of that? No point whatsoever. I'm not interested in that. And I can't afford to. It's not like I've got loads of money and I can afford to turn down people like them commissioning me, because I do need the money. But I'm not gonna do that kind of thing.
Economically, I'm guessing that this is sort of driven very differently to the band, in the sense I presume these are government grants that are ultimately paying for everything. Is that
Yeah, it is.
so? Does it matter who's in charge in that context? I mean, do you get more money under Labour or whatever?
It does matter, but it even matters depending on who's the culture minister. They have
Oh,
a huge
really?
effect. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have a really big effect on things.
Nadine Dorris or someone like
Oh,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. Say
yeah.
no more. Yeah. Okay.
And it's funny because I am really critical of the Arts Council, because most of the money goes to big organisations. So like Red Ladder Theatre, who I work with, which is just two people running it all, and then when they do a project, they bring people in. It's run on a shoestring, and they're amazing for what they do in terms of education and doing their plays in upstairs in pubs as well as on big theatre stages, and is fantastic. And they have to fight for every penny they get from the Arts Council. Whereas Opera North, for instance, will get literally £1 million a year for being Opera North, for putting on Figaro and
Mm,
Don Giovanni. And so that really rankles with me.
I
But
bet.
the one thing that makes me happy to work with, for instance, with Welsh National Opera, is that I think that's my money. That's not the Arts Council's money or the government's money. Where they're there, they're giving it to us gratefully, and we're saying, "Thank you, I can now do my art thing." I think no, I'm working really hard. I worked really hard in a band for 30 years. I had a hit single where I paid like 60% or whatever it was, 80% tax for 3 years, and gave it all to the government because I had no choice, because we made all the money in such a compressed period of time
Yeah.
that we were on high tax thing, and we all obviously it all went to the government. And I'm not bitter about that, but I do think no, that's my money, and so if I can use it to get it off the Arts Council and do something worthwhile, rather than some shitty opera that's from the 1700s that means nothing, then I'll do it. I'll take it, and that's important.
I've got one thing. This is perhaps sounds a bit flippant in the light of what you just said, but I've the crowds when you do this opera stuff. Do you get people in like penguin suits and ball gowns and things?
I've never done one where it's been a big audience. It's always fairly small audiences. And like I said, we one of them we did it where we took it into the refugee centre.
Mm,
And
mm.
that's brilliant. That's lovely, because nobody gets dressed up for that
No,
sort of thing.
no.
And but Sarah had one on this year, which was what was it called? Migrations, which was really political, basically about refugees and people coming to places, and a huge opera with like local 100 people in a choir and 70 people in the orchestra and a big audience. But I think that when people go to that sort of thing, they know that it's got some politics and they know what it's about, and they would probably feel weird going in penguin suits and things like that. But
Yeah.
there's a funny thing where this I've forgotten his name now. This great singer songwriter from up north. He wrote the music for a play called "Shut the Coal House Door." I've forgotten his name now. Brilliant Geordie theatre writer. It was about the miners' strike, and shut the coal house door, and they put it on up north in the mining areas, and they invited all the people from the mining areas to go and see it because it was about them and all that. And he's a proper he's dead now. He's a proper working class writer. And the funny thing is that when they had these previews where they invited people and everyone got free tickets and everything, all the working class people from these mining communities went dressed up with shirts and ties, really dressed up. Whereas all the theatre people were all like dressing down
That's
because
down, yeah.
it's like 1980s, and they're like, oh, we're roughing it, with the. And I thought that was great, because sometimes you're in working class things where you think, no, the classic football thing was how the working class kids suddenly, and mods as well, suddenly started dressing neater than the upper classes.
Mm.
which
Yes,
I always thought was
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of it was liberated clothes from European away games, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The brands and the labels were all brought from Italy, weren't they?
yeah. Golfing shops and all that kind of
That's
stuff.
right. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Where, of course, we used to find out that in the 1980s and early 90s, when we toured Europe a lot, we just couldn't believe that you would go in shops and there was no security. We were just like, oh my goodness, you just pick something up and think, well, I might as well walk out with this. And that was a lovely boon to tour in Europe for a while.
Yeah, yeah. There's one final thing. I could go
Mm,
on all night, but I do have work to do. So one
yes,
final thing I was
sorry.
that's not your fault. This is great. Um, that's the fault of capitalism if we're going to come down to it. But there we go.
Yeah,
Bell running. You wrote your memoirs and footnote, and you wrote this book about fell running, which
yeah,
I think this is the bit where I'm just thinking you must be a bit mad, really. I don't get that on any
yeah,
level. It just looks like torture. It looks depressing. It looks uncomfortable.
yeah.
So, what on earth? Why? You know?
Why? Yeah, it's a lot of running. I think a lot of you know when you're driving along the road and you see a runner coming past, on the road running past, and they just look like they're not enjoying it, and you just think,
Hmm,
what? Why would anyone do that? You just look like that's painful and joyless.
yes.
But fell running, I first when I first discovered it, I went to this. It was because I went to a race, not knowing anything about it, and thinking that sounds interesting. I'll go and watch one of these races, and seeing about 200 people running up this hill, not quite a mountain, I don't think, in the Yorkshire Dales, and then running back down again. And the winner was someone I knew who had I didn't know him at the time, but he had a Mohican haircut. He had a pink Mohican, and he played bass in a punk band called Pagan Idols. I just thought, oh my goodness, that's that lad who plays bass in that punk band, and he's just won that fell race. And I thought, what is it about that means he can beat all these people? And so I've got to go and talk to him. I went to talk to him, and he just said, "I'll take you out on a run. Why don't you have a go?" Thought, okay, yeah. But it was that thing of thinking this is inclusive. It's not, and I watched when you watch Steve Ovett and Seb Coe on the telly when you're growing up and you're a kid. And that's what running was. It was the Olympics, and it was these super fit professional athletes, basically. So then to see Gary with his pink Mohican haircut winning this race, I just thought, now there's a sport I could get behind. And I just had a go at it and discovered that it was a good way of getting out of the city and understanding about landscape. And he said, come and do a race. And we went to this little village in the middle of nowhere where, again, 200 or 300 people ran up a hill and down again. And I thought, wow, this is getting out to the countryside in a way that I didn't know existed. Getting out to the countryside to me always before was almost literally was just, apart from hunt sabbing, was just, yeah, the torture of being out in the countryside. What do you do there? What's the point of that? And I just discovered about the land and about land access and land ownership and about feeling that being out on the hills or in forests or whatever or on the moors is an essential part of who we are as people, and that it's important to me to rediscover that and to feel part of it, because I wasn't getting much out of being in the city centres. I was getting bored of walking around shopping centres, and here was this other world that I hadn't really discovered, and I thought, this is great. And that was it. I was hooked, never stopped.
I can identify with everything you're saying about going to the countryside, but there's a couple of details still in the way here, aren't there? Like going when
Well,
it's pouring with rain and only
yeah,
wearing a vest and getting really knackered and falling
yeah,
over and hurting yourself.
yeah,
That's a more difficult sell as far as I'm
yeah.
concerned, quite frankly.
Well, me and Gary had lots of conversations about the 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 relationship between punk and fell running. So it's not road running. It's not kind of straight lines. We're going to tell you exactly where to go. You've got to pay loads of money to do it. It's really DIY. It really is. And so there's a race that's up from a place up near Ilkley called Addingham. It's a Tuesday night race, and you get there and you get a number that's a piece of paper that someone's just written a number on in felt tip pen, and they go, all right, yeah, we haven't any safety pins. So you've got to like look around, ask somebody if someone's got a way of actually fixing this number on you. And they say, oh, okay, this is a really low key race. It's only like £2 to enter and there's no prizes and no results. And you just think, this is fantastic. I'm not doing it for the glory or for the, it's just about getting out and having a good time and seeing if you can beat your demons and get to the top of a hill. And there's no one telling you to do it. There's no one behind you going, get up that hill. It's just you. And I love that. Even if I'm out training, I'm going up running up Ben Nevis. I will always think to myself, God, this is hard. Well, I think, yeah, but there's no one telling you to do it. You stop if you want, turn around and go back down. And I think, no, I want to get to the top. I like the idea of pushing myself, see what I can do. Does that make it any more appealing to you?
Well, you're explaining yourself, but don't expect me at a race anytime soon.
I don't expect it, to be honest. I really don't.
Cool. Okay, listen, Boff, I better leave it there.
Okay.
It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Once again, I think there's still way more we could probably talk about, but for now, I will absolutely thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for just something that's really, really, really an interesting story, I think. And you're off on tour on a theatre tour tomorrow.
Yes, off to Ennerdale and then 3 weeks of being in other places.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that. Hope it all goes really well.
It's like being in a band again.
Yeah, well, cool.
Yeah.
That's really that just struck me that, when you said you were off away from home and all that.
On tour, blooming heck. Okay, no, I'd say I've really enjoyed this. And I say this, I don't often do interviews nowadays, but when I do them, I always think it's really good because it's just a chance to actually kind of rethink what you really think about things. And most people don't get that opportunity. You just wander along with your own thoughts. So it's nice to actually try to articulate what you think about things.
Absolutely, and it works two ways. What you say makes me think about what I think about things.
Yeah,
as well.
Great.
And of course, being peers, it's got that added interest as well that we've got sort of similar backgrounds and so on, I suppose.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Cool.
Brilliant.
Okay, well, I'll end the recording here and then I'll say goodbye off camera. And so only remains for me to say, if you missed part one, it's just as good as this. And thank you, Boff.
Thank you very much. Cheers.